Hi, Tom Isaac here. I just wanted to go through the first part of the tax return assignment with you, and that's doing Schedule 1. So if you go through and you look at the documents that you've downloaded, so hopefully you've pulled all of these down. There's a separate video on how to do that. If you skip that, you can go back and review how to pull all the documents together. But we're going to do this part right here. So in the Year 1 tax return assignment, we've talked about all this stuff in here, and now we're getting to the first part of the actual assignment, and that's Tax Form 1040 Schedule 1, or commonly just called Schedule 1. And so what we're going to be doing is we're going to take that file and we're going to make sure that we have saved it. So here's all of my files. Here's Schedule 1. This is what Schedule 1 looks like. I'm going to make sure to save that file to my computer with my name on it. So I'm going to go ahead and put my name on this. So I'm going to put first name and last name and your social security number. Please don't put your social security number in here. You can just type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. That would be fine. There's two parts to this schedule. The part 1, which is additional income, and then there is part 2, which are adjustments to income. Now I know there's a lot of things on here, but we're not going to use all of these. So let me show you the ones that we are going to use. And you can follow along with how we're going to do this by each one of these sets of instructions. So you can see in here, once we've saved the file, part 1, the additions to income, it's got 3 parts which we're most likely going to be using. So line 3, line 5, and line 6. And again, let's go over and take a look at Schedule 1. Line 3 is for business income or loss. It says attach Schedule C. We're going to simplify this process a lot. And what we're going to do is we're not going to complete Schedule C, but what you're going to include in here in this business income or loss is simply the stuff that was classified as gig work. So this would be sort of whatever your side hustle is. So in your personal life map portfolio project, this is the stuff that would be reported in worksheet 4 in here as other earned income. It says contractor gig work. And in your tax statements, this is going to show up here in your tax statements in this form 1099 NEC, non-employee compensation. So you can see I had $5,000 there, so that shows up here in box 1 of form 1099 NEC. So that means when we look at Schedule 1, we're going to come here and we're going to put that $5,000 in. So this is additional income which I have earned, which did not get reported on my W-2. The other lines that we might use could be rental real estate. This would probably be pretty rare for most students, but not all. So if you had maybe an apartment where you collected rent from somebody else, this might be reported in your worksheet 4 as rental income. As you can see out here, other earned income, rental income shows $1,000 on the tax statement. In the back of the workbook, you can see it's in this 1099 miscellaneous, $1,000 for rents. So that would go here in my form 1099 Schedule 1. It's going to go here in line 5. So I'll go ahead and put that in. Now there's a few other things in here which conceivably might be something that you would have. I have had students who say they're going to have farm income. If you have that, you would put that in here in line 6. But for the most part, those would be the common ones that you might have, that non-employee compensation and that 1099 miscellaneous. If you go back to the main instructions, you can see there's one other part in here. Again, line 6, unlikely for most students, but if you're thinking of going into farming, by all means talk to your instructor about that. Now I'm going to go ahead and finish up part 1 by totaling that all up. So I got 5,000 plus 1,000. Most of these things are pretty unlikely for most students. You see, they're very, very specific. I guess the only other one that might be something is if you had gambling winnings, cancellation of debt. There's even down in here, if you earn Olympic medals, you actually have to show that as income. But I'm going to bring that all down here and total that up, and I've got $6,000. So you can see that completes the first part, Part 1, additional income section of Schedule 1. Now, we're going to go to the second page of Schedule 1, Part 2, adjustments to income. Again, if I come back to my instructions, you can see when I get to here, there's probably only a few that are going to be relevant for most students. And that's going to be the educator expense, the IRA deduction, and your student loan interest deduction. Now, these are not quite as obvious as they sound. So let's take them one at a time. So line 11 of Schedule 1 is the educator expense. Now, there is a very specific definition and criteria that you have to meet, and you can't just put in anything. So what am I going to do here? Well, I've got to go back to the IRS's instructions. So I come back here to the IRS instructions for 1040. You notice this includes the instructions for Schedule 1 through Schedule 3. I can click over here on instructions for Schedule 1 because that's what I'm working on in the bookmarks. And you can see that takes me right here. So we've already talked about lines 1 through 10 already. So we're going to scroll through all of this. And we'll come down here to adjustments to income. You notice this starts on page 89. If you also looked at my directions, you can see it says as well, see page 89 of the instructions. So for the instructions, here we are. Whoops, that's Schedule A. There we are. There's line 11, educator expense. So if you were an eligible educator in 2023, you can deduct up to, in line 11, up to $300 of qualified expenses. Now, you notice you have to be an eligible educator is a kindergarten through grade 12 teacher, instructor, counsel, principal, or aide who worked in a school for at least 900 hours during the school year. You cannot take this educator expense if you are teaching in a dance studio that is not part of a K-12 school, or if you're teaching some other things that's not within a K-12 environment, then it doesn't qualify. So I can take up to $300. It has to be a qualified expense. So that would be things like professional development, books, supplies, equipment, and so on. And given that the average teacher in this country spends $1,200 of their own money, that's a pretty easy one to be able to document. So in Schedule 1, if I were a qualified educator, I would put $300 here. If I'm not a qualified educator, I'm going to put 0. So line 11 is sort of the first one that's a possible adjustment to income. The next one is the IRA deduction. So you just completed worksheet 14 on retirement investments. So if you have a qualified traditional IRA in worksheet 14, you can take a deduction for that. So if I look at worksheet 14, let me come back here. And so you can see here in worksheet 14, I made a contribution of $6,480, and I checked the box that this was a traditional IRA. Now, you should know the difference between a Roth IRA and a traditional IRA, since we've completed that section on retirement income. Only traditional IRAs are eligible for a deduction, $6,480 in my case. So I'm going to come over here to form Schedule 1 again, and that goes in here in line 20. Now, if I have any question about this, you'll notice as well, it says in here, you have to complete the worksheet on page 93. Right? So why do I have to do that? The reason that I have to do that is that in the instructions for, let's see, that's Schedule A. There it is. Let's go down here to line 20. You can see IRA deduction. You have to read this all. You want to make sure that you can qualify. You cannot deduct contributions to a Roth IRA, and you have to complete this worksheet to make sure that you can actually take this deduction. Now, why is that? The reason for that is that not everybody can take the deduction for an IRA. Some people, if you make too much money, you actually can't take it. So you have to complete this worksheet. So you see on this page, this is page 93. It says IRA deduction worksheet, Schedule 1, line 20. That's what we're working on. So you're going to go through and complete this. You go through this whole process and it will tell you to what extent you can or cannot take the IRA deduction. So assuming that you can, then you can go ahead and you can take that deduction. So whatever I end up here, all the way down here at the bottom, you see here in line 12, whatever, 12A, whatever number I get here is what I can actually take. Now, for most students, not all, but most students, that means that you're going to be able to take the amount shown in the personal life map portfolio project tax statement. And so you can actually see here, in the worksheet 14, you can actually see here that $6,480, which I've put in here. But you have to complete that worksheet in the instructions to make sure that you are eligible to do that. So let's say that I am. I'm going to come down here and put $6,480. The other one that would be likely for most students is the student loan interest deduction. Now, where does that information come from? Back to my personal life map portfolio project, in my tax statements, you can see there is this from my student loan lender, Form 1098E, student loan interest statement. And you can see this is the interest which I paid. Where does this come from? This comes from the personal loan section. So if I had a certain amount of loans at a certain interest rate, you'll notice that you can see it actually calculates the total amount of interest. In this case, $3,524.22, and that ends up showing on this tax statement 1098E, $3,524.22. Now, you cannot just drop that into the Schedule 1. Why? Because, again, there are limitations. If you have too much income or you have too much interest, you can only deduct a portion of it. I've got to go back to the instructions again. So looking back at the instructions for the 1040, you can see I'm in here in line 21, student loan interest deduction. And so just like the IRA had this little worksheet for you to complete in the instructions, so does the student loan interest deduction. So there's this whole process. I'm going to put in here. Notice it starts right out. Enter the total interest you paid in 2023 on qualified student loans. Don't enter more than $2,500. Well, didn't I have $3,400? But what that tells me is I can actually only make an adjustment to my income for up to $2,500, and that also depends upon what my household income is. So I'm going to have to complete that whole worksheet, and I'm going to come down here to what the amount of my student loan interest is actually allowed to be able to be adjusted to my income. It can't be anything more than $2,500. So going back to Schedule 1, and I'm in here in line 21, even though I had $3,400 some odd dollars, the most is going to be $2,500. So now I can go through any other adjustments. You'll notice most of these are relatively rare for most people. And if you think one of these qualifies, talk to your instructor. But again, for most people, it's not going to. And then I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add up. Okay, so in terms of finishing up then part 2 of Schedule 1, we're going to just add up what we've got. So I've got $300 for the educator expense. I've got $6,800 or $6,480 for the IRA deduction, and then $2,500 for the student loan interest deduction. Add that all up, and now I've got $9,780. So that completes Schedule 1. And the two things that I'm looking at for Schedule 1 are these two things here. The total additional income in line 10, 6,000 here, and then the total for adjustments to income down here, 9780 in line 26. We're going to need these two shortly in our work on 1040. So anyways, you're going to want to make sure to complete this, set that aside for now. We're going to need that. All right, move on to the next video about the completing the IRS Form 1040.